Woman faints upon discovering elderly woman in nursing home is her mother who disappeared 20 years ago. Emily Parker felt trapped by life. At 38, recently divorced and drowning in her ex-husband's debts, she watched as her apartment in Portland was about to be auctioned off by the bank. The social worker desperately needed a fresh start. That's when the temporary position at Pinewood Residence opened up, a luxurious nursing home in the neighboring town of Eugene. The salary was well above market rate, with lodging included, on the premises. Emily hesitated only for a moment. The place was less than 2 hours from Portland, the city where she'd grown up and held painful memories. But necessity spoke louder. "Welcome to Pinewood Residence, Ms. Parker," said Margaret Wilson, the executive director, a woman in her early 50s with brown hair pulled into a flawless bun and a calculated smile. "I hope you adjust well to our routines. We treat our residents like family." "Thank you for the opportunity," Emily replied, taking in the understated luxury of the facility. Polished hardwood floors, fresh flower arrangements in the corners, soft background music. Nothing resembling the dreary stereotype of nursing homes. "I'm looking forward to meeting the residents." "Of course. Let's start with a tour of the facilities and then I'll introduce you to some of our long-term guests. Here at Pinewood, we value discretion and dignity. Many prominent families in the area trust us with their loved ones." Emily followed Margaret through the spacious hallways, decorated with paintings of Oregon landscapes, trying to memorize every detail. The bedroom doors were all identical, made of solid wood with golden numbers. It would be easy to get lost here. "Our residents are free to personalize their rooms. Some bring their own furniture, photographs, small personal items. We believe it helps with adaptation and well-being." As the director explained meal times and activities, Emily noticed movement at the end of the hallway. A silver-haired woman in a wheelchair held an old photograph between her wrinkled fingers. There was something familiar about the scene that made Emily freeze. "Is something wrong, Miss Parker?" Margaret asked, puzzled by the sudden pallor on the new employee's face. Emily didn't answer. Her feet seemed rooted to the polished floor as her eyes locked onto the elderly woman down the hall. The woman gazed at the photograph with a distant expression, as if searching for a memory lost in time. "Who is that resident?" Emily asked, her voice trembling as she pointed. Margaret adjusted her glasses, looking in the direction Emily indicated. "Ah, Mrs. Louise, one of our longest-standing residents. She's been with us for 5 years, a very private woman." "Louise?" Emily repeated the name as if testing its weight. "What's her last name?" "Louise Johnson. Why the sudden interest?" "Earn her." Emily didn't reply. An inexplicable urgency pulled her toward the woman. Without asking permission, she hurried down the hallway, leaving Margaret behind. "Ms. Parker," the director called, baffled by the reaction. "We need to finish your orientation tour first." But Emily was already just feet away from the elderly woman. Her heart pounded so hard it threatened to leap from her chest. The woman, sensing her approach, lifted her eyes from the photograph. They were blue, faded with time, but ones Emily would recognize anywhere in the world. "Mom!" The word escaped like a whisper. The elderly woman studied Emily with curiosity, but no recognition. Her eyes wandered over the stranger's face, as if searching for something familiar in foreign territory. "Do I know you?" the woman asked, her voice fragile, hands trembling slightly. Emily felt the world crumble beneath her. It was her. It was her mother. Sarah Parker, who disappeared 20 years ago when Emily was just 18. She had gone out to buy medicine on a rainy night and never returned home. Gathering all her courage, Emily stepped closer and looked at the photograph in the elderly woman's hands. It was a picture of herself at 15, smiling in front of their old house in Portland. In the image, she wore a blue elementary school graduation dress. "Where did you get this photo?" Emily asked, feeling her throat tighten. Before the woman could answer, Emily felt the floor ripple beneath her feet. The hallway walls seemed to lean toward her. The air grew thick, suffocating. The last thing she saw was her mother's confused face before darkness swallowed everything. Distant voices cut through the fog in her mind. Emily tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. Someone was holding her wrist, The smell of alcohol was familiar. She had worked in hospitals before. "She's coming to," said a man's voice, pressure stabilizing. Emily finally managed to open her eyes. She was lying on a couch in what she assumed was an administrative office. A man in a white coat tucked a stethoscope into his medical bag. Margaret Wilson watched the scene with an expression mixing concern and annoyance. "What happened?" Emily asked, trying to sit up. "You fainted in the hallway," Margaret explained. "Dr. Thompson was here to attend to you. It was a hypoglycemic episode, apparently. When was the last time you ate properly?" Emily ignored the question. The memories rushed back like an avalanche. The hallway, the elderly woman, the photograph, the blue eyes. "The woman in the hallway." Emily tried to stand. "I need to talk to her." Margaret exchanged a glance with the doctor before replying, "Mrs. Parker, I don't think you're in any condition to work today. I suggest you rest in your quarters and we'll resume orientation tomorrow." "You don't understand." Emily gripped the director's arm with surprising strength. "That woman is my mother who disappeared 20 years ago." A heavy silence fell over the room. Margaret looked at the doctor again, her expression unreadable to Emily. "Dr. Thompson, could you give us a moment?" the director asked. When the doctor left, she closed the door and sat facing Emily. "Mrs. Parker, I understand the stress of moving and starting a new job can be overwhelming, but—" "I'm not confused or stressed," Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "That woman is Sarah Parker, my mother. She left home one night to buy medicine and never came back. We filed police reports, searched hospitals, shelters. For years." Margaret sighed deeply. "Mrs. Louise Johnson has been with us for 5 years. She was brought in by her adoptive children, the Johnsons. They informed us she suffers from senile dementia and mental confusion. She has good days and bad." "Adoptive children? My mother never adopted anyone." Emily felt a wave of indignation. "This doesn't make sense." "Please calm down." Margaret adjusted her glasses, visibly uncomfortable. "I know this must be difficult for you, but accusing our residents or their families—" "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm saying there's been a mistake. That woman is my mother, and I have proof. I have photos, documents. I can do a DNA test." Margaret stood and walked to the window, thoughtful. "Mrs. Parker, even if there's some physical resemblance between our resident and your missing mother, I must warn you that the Johnsons are extremely influential in this area. They're major donors to Pinewood residents and wouldn't take kindly to baseless accusations." Emily understood the subtext. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Money, influence, power, the same old story. "I'm not leaving without talking to her," she declared, standing up with determination. "If necessary, I'll quit right now and come back as a visitor, but I will speak to my mother." Margaret seemed to weigh her options before responding. "I'll allow you to talk to her, supervised by me, but I must warn you that Mrs. Johnson has memory lapses. Don't be surprised if she doesn't recognize you or seems confused. And please, don't mention your theories to her or any staff. It would be very unsettling for everyone." Emily nodded, willing to accept any condition to gain access to her mother. Minutes later, they were walking toward the inner garden, where the elderly woman had been taken after the hallway incident. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Mrs. Louise was sitting on a bench under a tree, still holding the old photograph. Emily's heart raced as they approached. It was so strange to see her mother like this, fragile, aged, looking far older than her 68 years. Time had been cruel. "Mrs. Louise," Margaret called gently, "I've brought someone to talk to you. This is Emily, our new social worker." The elderly woman lifted her eyes, the same familiar blue, now clouded by time. She looked at Emily with curiosity, but without the flicker of recognition her daughter so desperately hoped for. "Hello, dear," she said softly. "Are you new here?" Each word was a knife in Emily's heart. The voice was the same, though weaker. The slight tilt of her head when asking a question, unchanged, but there was no recognition in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I just started today. She sat beside her while Margaret stood at a distance close enough to hear. "That's a lovely photo you have there," Emily said, pointing to the time-worn picture. Mrs. Louise gazed at it tenderly. "It's my daughter," she said with pride. "My little girl. So smart. I've missed her so much." Emily's eyes welled with tears. Her mother still remembered her, even if she couldn't recognize her now. "Your daughter sounds wonderful. What's her name?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. The elderly woman frowned, confused. Her gaze grew distant, as if searching for something lost in a mental maze. I can't remember," she finally said, distressed. "Why can't I remember my own daughter's name?" Tears rolled down her wrinkled face. Emily ached to hug her, to say it was okay, that she was right there. But Margaret's warning look held her back. "Maybe you're just tired today," Emily suggested gently. "Memories can play tricks sometimes. May I come talk to you another day?" Mrs. Louise nodded, still staring at the photo. "You have kind eyes." "Like hers," she remarked, looking up at Emily. For a brief moment, something flickered in her gaze, a spark, perhaps. But it faded just as quickly. "Come back whenever you'd like, dear." "I think that's enough for today," Margaret interjected with a strained smile. "Mrs. Louise needs to rest before dinner, and Mrs. Parker must still be recovering from fainting." Emily didn't want to leave, but she knew she had to tread carefully. Too much was at stake. She needed regular access to her mother, and antagonizing Margaret or the facility wouldn't help. "It was a pleasure, Mrs. Louise. I'll be back soon," she promised, standing up. Back in the director's office, Margaret seemed less hostile but still cautious. "I understand your confusion, Mrs. Parker, but you must understand my position. Pinewood Residence has an impeccable reputation. Our residents and their families trust us to protect their privacy and well-being." "I don't want to cause trouble," Emily replied, "but I need to understand how my mother ended up here, how she became Louise Johnson. Someone must have records, documents, something that explains this." Margaret crossed her hands on the table. "We have identification documents, a birth certificate, and medical records confirming she is Louise Johnson, a widow with no biological children. The Johnson couple took her in many years ago when they found her disoriented after what appeared to be an accident. Legally, they are her adoptive children and legal guardians." "Can I see those documents?" "I'm sorry, but that would violate patient confidentiality. Only direct family members have access to that kind of information." "But I am direct family." "Not according to our records," Margaret countered. "If you truly believe this theory, I suggest you pursue legal avenues, a DNA test perhaps. But until then, I must insist that you keep your interactions with Mrs. Louise strictly professional. No mention of your supposed relationship or disturbing her peace." Emily knew it was an uphill battle. Without concrete proof, her word meant little against official documents and the Johnson family's influence. "I'll accept your terms for now," she finally said. "I'll maintain my professionalism, but I won't give up on finding the truth." Margaret seemed relieved. "If there truly is some mistake in this situation, we'll have every interest in correcting it. But until then, I expect absolute discretion. Can I count on that?" "You can," Emily replied, knowing she'd need to be strategic. "You have my word." The staff housing was in a separate wing of the main complex. It was simple but comfortable. A single room with a bathroom, a small shared kitchen, and a common living area. Emily barely registered the details as she unpacked. Her mind was miles away, reliving the encounter with her mother. 20 years. 20 long years believing that perhaps Sarah was dead, buried as a Jane Doe somewhere. And all that time, she'd been alive. Confused, lost in her own mind, but alive. Emily grabbed her phone and scrolled through old photos. She found one of her mother at 48, just before she disappeared. She mentally compared it to the elderly woman she'd seen today. Yes, it was her, no doubt. The same eyes, the same face, shape. Time had changed her, but Emily would recognize her mother under any circumstances. She debated calling her Aunt Margaret, Sarah's sister, who had suffered as much as she had over the disappearance. But she decided to wait. She needed more information before giving false hope to the family. Lying on her narrow bed, Emily planned her next steps. First, she needed to earn the trust of the staff and, if possible, Margaret herself. Then, discreetly, investigate the history of this Johnson family, and most importantly, spend as much time as possible with her mother, trying to spark some memory. Sleep was slow to come. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of rain, a dark street, her mother walking away without looking back. The next morning, Emily woke up determined. She dressed in the institution's simple uniform, black pants and a white blouse, and tied her brown hair into a ponytail. She needed to appear professional and discreet. In the staff cafeteria, she met some colleagues. Ashley, the head nurse, a sturdy woman with an easy smile. James, the physical therapist, a middle-aged man with a paternal air. And Sophie, the newly graduated nutritionist. "So you're the new social worker?" Ashley asked between sips of coffee. "Welcome, this place is peaceful to work in. Just have patience with the director. She's a bit rigid." "I noticed," Emily smiled. "I'm looking forward to getting to know the residents better. Yesterday I briefly met Mrs. Louise. She seems like a lovely lady." Ashley and James exchanged glances. "Mrs. Louise is a sweetheart," Ashley said, lowering her voice. "But she has difficult days. Sometimes she confuses people, thinks we're someone from her past. It's sad." "Does her family visit often?" Emily asked, trying to sound casual. "The Johnsons?" James let out a dry laugh. "Rarely. When they do show up, it's always to handle some paperwork. I've never seen them show much affection." "Strange for adoptive children, isn't it?" Emily commented. "Not really," Ashley shrugged. "A lot of people drop their elderly here and forget about them. They pay the expensive monthly fee and think it clears their conscience. At least Pinewood Residence offers good care, unlike some other places out there." Emily wanted to ask more questions, but noticed Margaret entering the dining hall and changed the subject. The last thing she needed was to raise suspicions. "Good morning, everyone," Margaret greeted the group. "Mrs. Parker, once you finish your coffee, I'd like to review your schedule for today. We have several residents waiting for social evaluations." Emily's day was filled with interviews and routine assessments. She met many residents, listened to their stories, their complaints, their small joys. Pinewood Residence housed about 50 seniors, most from wealthy families in the area. Some were lucid and active, others showed varying degrees of cognitive decline. All day, Emily looked for opportunities to get closer to Mrs. Louise, but the elderly woman remained in her room, seemingly unwell. It wasn't until late afternoon, when most staff were preparing to leave, that Emily spotted her in the courtyard again. With a racing heart, she approached. Her mother was watching a small bird hopping between the bushes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Louise. Do you remember me?" "I'm Emily. We talked yesterday." The elderly woman turned slowly, her blue eyes fixed on Emily's, and for a moment there seemed to be a spark of recognition. "Emily?" She repeated the name, as if testing its sound. "That's a pretty name. My daughter was called—" Her voice faltered, her forehead wrinkling in confusion. "Why can't I remember?" "Don't worry," Emily sat beside her, fighting the urge to hold her hand. "Memories sometimes get mixed up. It happens to all of us. But it shouldn't happen with my own daughter's name." There was genuine anguish in her voice. "Sometimes I feel like there's a wall in my mind. I can see shadows on the other side, but I can't get through." Emily felt a lump in her throat. What had happened to her mother in those 20 years? What trauma could have caused this mental confusion? "Do you remember where you lived before?" "Coming here?" she asked gently. Mrs. Louise furrowed her brow, concentrating. "A house with a blue porch, I think. There was a garden. I took care of roses." Emily's heart raced. Their family home in Portland had a blue porch, and her mother had loved growing roses in the front garden. "And before the house where you lived with the Johnsons, do you remember anything?" Confusion returned to the elderly woman's face. "The Johnsons? Oh yes, Robert and Catherine. They take care of me. They're good to me." But there was something mechanical in how she said it, as if reciting a rehearsed line. "Do you have other memories from your life before them?" Emily pressed softly. Mrs. Louise seemed to withdraw. Her gaze grew distant, almost frightened. "We shouldn't talk about that," she whispered. "Robert says it's bad for me to remember, that I should look to the future, not the past." Emily felt a chill. Something was deeply wrong here. Before she could ask more, she heard footsteps approaching. It was Ashley. "Oh, there you are, Mrs. Louise. It's time for your medicine and then dinner." The nurse gave Emily a curious look. "Is everything all right?" "No, we were just talking," Emily replied, standing up. "Mrs. Louise was telling me about the flowers she used to grow." "Oh yes, she loves gardening. When she's feeling well, she helps tend to these flower beds here." Ashley smiled, helping the elderly woman to her feet. "Come on, Mrs. Louise, we don't want to be late for dinner." "Goodbye, dear," Mrs. Louise said to Emily. "Come back to chat some more. I enjoy your company." Emily waved, her heart aching as she watched her mother being led away. There was so much more to uncover, and time wasn't on her side. If the Johnson couple showed up, they might decide to move her somewhere else, and Emily would lose her chance to reconnect with her mother. That night, Emily barely slept. She mapped out every step of her investigation. She needed concrete proof, something that would confirm that Louise Johnson was in fact Sarah Parker. Ideally, a DNA test, but how could she get one without raising suspicion? The next morning during her shift, Emily looked for opportunities to examine Mrs. Louise's medical records. The residence files were kept in a locked room near Margaret's office, accessible only to medical and administrative staff. At lunch, she noticed the receptionist who kept the keys stepping out for a smoke. Heart-pounding, Emily approached the empty front desk. "Ashley asked me to get Mrs. Louise Johnson's file," she lied to the intern covering for the receptionist. "She needs to check some medications." The young man hesitated. "I don't know if I can. The key is with Diane." "It's urgent," Emily insisted. "If you want, I can call Ashley to confirm. She's with the patient now, so she asked for my help." Reluctantly, the intern handed over the spare key. "Please hurry. If the director finds out I gave you the key, it'll be quick, I promise." With trembling hands, Emily unlocked the records room. She quickly located the drawer labeled J and found the folder labeled Johnson Louise. Heart racing, she opened it. The medical records were detailed: diagnosis of senile dementia, episodes of confusion and disorientation, memory lapses. But it was the admission form that caught her attention. Under previous medical history, it read, "Unknown. Patient had no prior medical documentation before adoption by the Johnson family." Emily discreetly snapped photos of a few pages with her phone. Then she searched for information about the Johnson couple. She found an address in an upscale Portland neighborhood and phone numbers. There was also a note: "In case of emergency, contact Mr. Robert Johnson first. Do not disturb Mrs. Catherine Johnson due to health conditions." Just before leaving, Emily spotted a yellow envelope at the back of the folder. Inside was a copy of what appeared to be a birth certificate in the name of Louise Smith, maiden name. Born April 3, 1958 in Salem, Oregon. The date matched her mother's, but the location was wrong. Sarah had been born in Denver. The document seemed forged, but how could she prove it? Emily put everything back in place and hurried out of the room, returning the key to the grateful intern. Over the next few days, Emily split her time between her professional duties and moments with Mrs. Louise. Each conversation was a careful attempt to jog memories without distressing the elderly woman. "Do you like music?" Emily asked one afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the garden. "Oh yes," Mrs. Louise's eyes lit up. "I love Frank Sinatra and that singer. What's her name? The one who sings about the sea." "Nora Jones," Emily guessed, knowing it was her mother's favorite. "Yes, how did you know?" Mrs. Louise smiled, surprised. "Intuition?" Emily smiled back. "Would you mind if I sing a little?" "Sometimes. I sing when I'm nervous, it's a habit." "Of course not, dear, I love listening to music." Emily began to hum softly. "What You Really Want to Know," a song she used to sing with her mother while making dinner. She watched the elderly woman's face closely, searching for any reaction. For a moment, she saw something shift in Mrs. Louise's eyes. The old woman stopped rocking gently and fixed her gaze on Emily, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "That song," Mrs. Louise whispered, a single tear rolling down her wrinkled face. "My daughter and I used to sing it together." Emily felt her heart race. Do you remember her name? Your daughter's name? Mrs. Louise closed her eyes, concentrating hard. Emily, she finally said, opening her eyes with a flash of clarity. My girl's name is Emily. For a moment, time stood still. Mother and daughter looked at each other, separated by 20 years of absence and a fog of confusion. Emily fought the urge to embrace her, to shout that she was here, that she'd finally found her. It's a very beautiful name, she said instead, her voice trembling. Emily, you must love her very much. More than anything in the world, Mrs. Louise replied, with a conviction that defied her usual confusion. She had green eyes just like yours, and a smile that lit up the world. It was just the two of us, you know, against the world. Emily couldn't hold back her tears. Her mother remembered. Somewhere inside that troubled mind, Sarah Parker still existed. The moment of clarity, however, was brief. Soon, confusion returned to Mrs. Louise's eyes. Why am I crying? She asked, bewildered. Did something happen? No, Mrs. Louise, everything's fine. The song just moved us, that's all. Emily gently held the old woman's hand. Let's get you inside now. It's getting chilly. That night, Emily made a decision. She called her Aunt Margaret in Portland. Auntie, it's Emily. I need you to come to Eugene as soon as possible. I found Mom. There was silence on the other end, followed by a muffled sob. Emily, sweetheart, what are you saying? I found her, Auntie. Mom's alive. She's in a nursing home in Eugene. She doesn't recognize me. She's confused, but it's her. I'm absolutely sure. Between tears and anxious questions, they agreed Margaret would come the next day. Emily asked her to bring old family photos and any original documents of Sarah's she might have kept. They needed proof. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, continuing. The next day dragged on in agonizing slowness. Emily could barely focus on her tasks, constantly checking the clock. Margaret had promised to arrive around 3 in the afternoon. When the taxi finally pulled up in front of Pinewood residence, Emily rushed to the entrance. Her aunt, a dignified 65-year-old woman with completely white hair, stepped out with an expression of anxiety and hope. Auntie, Emily hugged her tightly. Thank you for coming so quickly. How could I not? Margaret cupped her niece's face in her hands. If there's any chance my sister is alive, her voice broke. Tell me everything. How did you find her? As they walked through the institution's gardens, Emily explained the situation. Her job at Pinewood residence, the chance encounter with Mrs. Louise, the photographs, the memory lapses, and her suspicions about the Wilson family. I need you to see her, Auntie. If it's really her, you'll recognize her instantly. You two always looked so much alike. And if it is her, what do we do? Margaret asked. These Wilsons seem like powerful people. One step at a time, Emily replied. First, we confirm it's her. Then, we can think about DNA tests. Lawyers, whatever it takes. I won't lose her again, Aunt, not after all this time. Emily registered Margaret as a visitor, listing herself as the resident receiving the visit. She knew it could complicate her professional situation, but it was a necessary risk. Carefully, she guided her aunt to the inner garden, where Mrs. Louise usually spent her afternoons. Emily's heart nearly stopped when she spotted her, sitting on her usual bench, flipping through an old magazine. It's her, Margaret whispered, stopping abruptly. Her face paled. My God, Emily, it's Sarah. My sister is alive. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, she stood frozen, as if afraid the vision might disappear if she blinked. Would you like me to go with you? Emily asked softly. No, Margaret regained her composure. Let me try alone first. Emily watched from a distance as her aunt slowly approached Mrs. Louise. She saw when Margaret sat beside her sister, when she said something that made the elderly woman look up from the magazine. She saw the exact moment Mrs. Louise frowned, confused but not hostile. The two spoke for nearly 10 minutes. Emily couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could read their body language. Her aunt gestured gently, showing something she'd taken from her purse, probably a photograph. Mrs. Louise examined it with interest, but without the shock of recognition Emily had expected. Finally, Margaret stood and returned, her face marked by conflicting emotions. "It's her without a doubt," she said, her voice trembling. "Even older, even confused. She's my sister Sarah. I showed her the photo from our 15th birthday when we celebrated together. She looked at it for a long time, said the girl in the photo seemed familiar, but couldn't say who it was." "And now?" Emily asked, holding her aunt's hands. "Now we fight," Margaret replied with determination. "We're bringing her home, Emily. Whatever happened to her, whoever took her from us, we're going to make it right." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Diane, accompanied by 2 security guards. The director's expression was one of restrained fury. "Mrs. Parker, we need to talk," she said coldly. "Immediately." Emily's stomach sank, but she kept her composure. "Of course, Director. This is my aunt, Margaret Parker. She came to visit me." "I'm aware of who she is," Diane replied, "and I'm aware that you lied on the visitor log, claiming she was here to see you, when in fact you brought her to see Mrs. Louise Johnson. A direct violation of my instructions." Emily exchanged a glance with her aunt before responding. "Director Diane, that woman isn't Louise Johnson. She's Sarah Parker, my mother and my aunt's sister. She disappeared 20 years ago and, for reasons we don't yet understand, she ended up here with a false identity." Diane adjusted her glasses, visibly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in the open gardens where other residents and staff could observe. "Let's go to my office," she ordered, "all of us." On the way, Emily noticed Ashley watching the scene with curiosity. She tried to convey with her eyes that she needed help, an ally, and the nurse seemed to understand, nodding discreetly. Once in the office, Diane dismissed the security guards and closed the door. "Mrs. Parker, I understand your emotional distress. Losing a mother is devastating, especially under the circumstances you've described. But what you're doing is serious. You're disturbing an elderly resident with cognitive issues and accusing a respectable family of, what exactly? Kidnapping? Identity fraud?" "We're just seeking the truth," Margaret interjected. "That woman is my sister. I can prove it with photos, documents, and we're willing to take a DNA test. If we're wrong, we'll accept the result. But what if we're right?" Margaret sighed, rubbing her temples. "You don't understand my position. The Johnson family—" Before she could continue, a secretary knocked on the door. "Sorry to interrupt, Director, but Mr. Robert Johnson is in the lobby. He said it's urgent." Emily's blood ran cold. The timing was too disturbing to be a coincidence. "Did someone call him?" Margaret asked, looking genuinely surprised. "Not that I know of. He said he tried reaching Mrs. Louise this morning, but she didn't answer her room phone, so he decided to come in person," the secretary explained. "Tell him I'll be right there." Margaret turned to Emily and Margaret. "Ladies, I suggest you wait here while I handle this." "No," Emily stood up. "I want to meet this man who claims to be my mother's adoptive son. I want to look him in the eye." "That's reckless," Margaret warned. "Let me talk to him first." "Director, with all due respect, this man and his wife may have kept my mother away from her real family for 2 decades, falsified documents, manipulated a vulnerable woman. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize immediately. But what if I'm right?" Margaret seemed genuinely conflicted. "Very well," she finally decided, "but let me lead the conversation. If you lose control, I'll ask you to leave. Are we clear?" "Perfectly," Emily agreed. Robert Johnson waited in the lobby. He was a man around 65 with neatly trimmed grey hair, an impeccable suit, and an impatient expression. When he saw Margaret, his face broke into a calculated smile. "Director Wilson, forgive the unannounced visit. I tried reaching my mother this morning with no success. I was worried." "Understandable, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Louise is fine. Just had a busy morning with therapy," Margaret replied professionally. "Actually, your visit is timely. We have a matter to discuss." It was then Robert noticed Emily and Margaret standing a few steps behind. His gaze briefly passed over them, showing no recognition or concern. "Is there a problem with my mother?" he asked, turning back to Margaret. "Perhaps we should speak privately," Margaret suggested. "No," Emily stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, my name is Emily Parker. This is my aunt, Margaret Parker. We believe the woman you call your adoptive mother is actually Sarah Parker, my biological mother, who disappeared 20 years ago." Robert's face paled momentarily, but he regained his composure with impressive speed. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but I'm afraid you're completely mistaken. My adoptive mother is Louise Johnson, widow of my stepfather, Anthony Johnson. My wife and I took her in over 15 years ago when she was already widowed and had no family." "An extraordinary coincidence, don't you think?" Emily countered. "She looks exactly like my missing mother. Same physical traits, same tastes. She even remembered my name today." Robert adjusted his jacket, visibly uncomfortable. "Director Wilson, is this some kind of joke? Who is this woman, and why is she making these outrageous accusations?" "Mrs. Parker is our newly hired social worker," Margaret explained. "She genuinely believes Mrs. Louise is her long-lost mother. I understand this is upsetting, Mr. Johnson, but perhaps we can resolve this amicably. A DNA test." "Ridiculous," Robert interrupted, raising his voice. "My mother suffers from cognitive issues. I won't subject her to the stress of tests and accusations from strangers. I have all the documents proving her identity and our legal relationship." "You have documents," Margaret interjected. "We have memories. I have photos of my sister Sarah. We grew up together. I know every scar, every birthmark, and I can recognize my own sister even after 20 years apart." Robert Johnson looked around, as if searching for an escape route from the situation. "Director Wilson, I want to speak with my mother now, and afterward, I'd like to discuss the possibility of transferring her to another facility. Clearly, Pinewood Residence is no longer providing the peaceful and secure environment I pay a fortune for. You want to transfer her so she can't be found by her real family," accused Emily, unable to contain her indignation. "Emily, please," Diane warned. "Mr. Johnson, I understand your concern, but whether or not you transfer Mrs. Louise, this situation must be resolved. If these ladies are mistaken, a simple DNA test will settle the matter once and for all. And if you refuse the test, it's obvious you have something to hide," Margaret added. Robert took a deep breath, adjusting his suit jacket in a gesture that betrayed his nervousness. "I'll consult my lawyers. In the meantime, I do not authorize any contact between these people and my mother. If necessary, I'll obtain a court order." "You talk about court orders," Emily stepped forward. "But shouldn't we be the ones seeking justice? After all, if we're right, you've kept a woman away from her real family for 2 decades. That has a name, you know." "Are you threatening me, Mom?" Robert narrowed his eyes. "I'm just stating facts," Emily held her ground. "If Louise Johnson is my mother, Sarah Parker, we have a serious problem that goes beyond a simple case of mistaken identity." A tense silence filled the reception area. Finally, Robert spoke. "I'll see my mother now. Afterward, Director, I'd like a private meeting with you." He turned to Emily and Margaret. "As for you, I suggest you consult your own lawyers. I won't tolerate slander against my family." As Robert walked away, escorted by Diane, Emily felt a mix of frustration and hope. The man was clearly shaken by the accusations. His reaction wasn't that of someone falsely accused, but of someone afraid of being exposed. "He's scared," Margaret whispered. "Did you see how he reacted when we mentioned the DNA test?" "Yes," Emily agreed, "but now we're in danger. He'll try to transfer her before we can prove anything." "We won't let him." Margaret squeezed her niece's hand. "We lost Sarah once. We won't lose her again." Robert's visit with Mrs. Louise lasted about 20 minutes. From the hallway, Emily tried to discreetly observe the room, where the door had been left slightly ajar. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language spoke volumes. The man spoke in a low, controlled tone, while Mrs. Louise seemed agitated, confused. At one point, Robert gripped her arm in a way that, while not exactly violent, was certainly controlling. When he left the room, Robert's expression was grim. He headed straight to Diane's office without looking back. Emily seized the opportunity to enter her mother's room. Mrs. Louise was sitting in the armchair, staring out the window with a distant look. There were tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Louise," Emily called softly. "Are you all right?" The elderly woman turned slowly. Her gaze met Emily's, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition. "Robert said I have to move," she murmured. "Said it's not safe here. But I don't want to go, Emily." I like it here." Emily's heart leaped at hearing her name spoken so naturally. "You remember my name," she said, emotional. "Of course I do, dear. You remind me of—" Mrs. Louise trailed off, confused. The glimmer of lucidity began to fade. "I'm sorry. Sometimes I get lost." Emily sat beside her, careful not to startle her. "Mrs. Louise, what else did Robert say?" The elderly woman seemed to shrink into herself. "That bad people are trying to deceive me, that I shouldn't trust anyone, that only he and Catherine truly care about me." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "But you're good, Emily, I can feel it. Thank you." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. "I would never harm you." Mrs. Louise looked deeply into Emily's eyes, as if searching for something familiar in them. "You remind me of someone important. When you sing, I feel at home." Emily couldn't hold back her tears. "Would you like me to sing now?" "Please," the elderly woman whispered. Emily began to sing softly once again. "What you really want to know." The same song they used to sing in the kitchen of the house with the blue porch. The song that had spanned decades and remained intact in her mother's fragile memory. As she sang, she saw more tears roll down Mrs. Louise's wrinkled face. When the song ended, the elderly woman reached out with a trembling hand and touched Emily's cheek. "My girl," she whispered with sudden clarity in her gaze. "My Emily." For a fleeting, magical moment, there was no confusion in her eyes, only recognition, love, the reunion of souls that time and circumstance had torn apart. "Yes, Mom?" Emily could no longer hold back. "It's me, your girl." Before they could say more, hurried footsteps in the hallway alerted them. Emily quickly pulled away from her mother, pretending to be checking her temperature when Ashley entered the room. "Emily, the director wants to see you immediately." The nurse looked worried. "Mr. Johnson already left, but he was furious. I heard something about lawyers and an immediate transfer. He wants to take her away before we can prove anything." Emily felt panic rising. "I can't let that happen." Ashley glanced down the hallway, making sure they were alone before speaking. "Listen, there's been something off about this case from the start. I've worked here 7 years. I was here when Mrs. Louise arrived. The Johnsons always seemed suspicious. They rarely visit, make strange demands, and their story never quite added up." "You believe me?" Emily asked, surprised. "Let's just say I have enough doubts to want the truth." Ashley looked at Mrs. Louise, who seemed to have slipped back into her usual confusion. "If she really is your mother, she deserves to know, and you deserve to have her back." "Thank you." Emily felt a wave of relief at having an ally. "What do you think the director will do?" "Probably follow Mr. Johnson's orders. They're big donors and she always favors the money." Ashley shrugged. "But don't lose hope. Go talk to her. Try to buy some time. Meanwhile, I'll keep an eye on Mrs. Louise." Emily thanked her and headed to the director's office, where her Aunt Margaret was already waiting. Diane's expression was grave. "Mrs. Parker, I regret to inform you that Mr. Johnson is demanding your immediate dismissal and prohibiting any contact between you and Mrs. Louise. He's also begun procedures to transfer the resident to another facility, citing emotional harassment. He's panicking," Emily argued, "because he knows we're right. Please, Director, give us a few days, just enough time to get a court order for the DNA test." "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." Diane seemed genuinely troubled. "Pinewood, residents can't get involved in family disputes." "This isn't a family dispute, it's a possible crime." Emily raised her voice. "A woman may have been taken from her family for 20 years, manipulated by strangers who control her life and her money." Margaret placed her hand on her niece's arm, calming her before speaking. "Director Wilson, I understand your difficult position, but I ask you to consider, what if it were your sister, your mother? Wouldn't you want someone to at least investigate before dismissing her?" Diane sighed, seeming genuinely conflicted. "I have a proposal," she finally said. "I'll give you 48 hours. During that time, Emily remains an employee and has supervised access to Mrs. Louise. Meanwhile, seek the legal resources you need. If you obtain a court order for a DNA test or any other concrete evidence, I'll keep Mrs. Louise here. Otherwise, I'll have to comply with the wishes of her legal family." "A legal family based on potentially fraudulent documents," Emily pointed out. Potentially, Diane emphasized. So far you only have assumptions and physical resemblances. You need more if you want to challenge 20 years of documented history. Emily knew it was the best deal they would get. We accept your terms. Thank you for the opportunity, Director. As soon as they left the office, Emily and Margaret began planning their next steps. We need a lawyer immediately, said Margaret. I know someone who can help us, a specialist in family law. And we need more evidence, Emily considered. I think we should talk to the other staff. Maybe someone noticed inconsistencies in the Johnson story over the years. We could also investigate Robert Johnson himself, Margaret suggested. If he and his wife fabricated a story to keep Sarah with them, there must be flaws somewhere. As they worked out their plan, Ashley discreetly approached. Emily, I have something that might interest you, she whispered, glancing around to ensure they weren't being watched. Mrs. Louise has a diary. She keeps it under her mattress. I never mentioned it to anyone because she asked me to keep it. It's her secret. She said Robert doesn't like her writing her memories. A diary? Emily felt a spark of hope. Could you? I already got it, Ashley smiled, discreetly handing her a small, worn notebook. Return it before anyone notices it's missing. And we never had this conversation. Thank you, Ashley. This could change everything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Emily and Margaret retreated to a cafe near Pinewood residence. With trembling hands, Emily opened the small diary. The pages were filled with shaky handwriting, which Emily immediately recognized as her mother's, though more uneven than she remembered. The first pages were confusing, with disjointed notes about a strange place, unfamiliar people. Dated 5 years ago, when Louise arrived at Pinewood residence. But as they read further, they found revealing passages. June 18th. I dreamed of my daughter again. She was wearing the blue graduation dress. She smiled at me. When I woke up, I couldn't remember her name. Robert says I don't have a daughter, that it's just confusion in my head, but the dream felt so real. July 5th, I found a photo in Catherine's room. A girl who looked so familiar. When I asked who it was, Robert became furious, said I had gone where I shouldn't. He took the photo from me. At night, I heard them arguing. Catherine said it was dangerous to keep that photo. What does that mean? August 29th. Today I remembered something important. My real name isn't Louise, it's Sarah Parker. I have a daughter named Emily. We lived in Portland, in a house with a blue porch. One night I went out to buy medicine for her. She had a fever. It was raining. A car hit me at the pharmacy corner. After that, I only remember waking up in the Johnsons' house. They said I was confused, that it was my imagination. But now I know I need to find my Emily. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she read. It was true. Her mother had been the victim of an accident, lost her memory, and been manipulated. By strangers for years. My God, Emily. Margaret held her niece's hands. This is the proof we needed. Your mother remembers. On some level, she knows who she is. But why? Emily couldn't understand. Why would these people keep her away from her real family for so long? They kept reading, searching for answers. In one of the last entries, dated just 3 months ago, they found a clue. I heard Robert talking on the phone about my accounts. He said something about investments that multiplied, about the house they sold in my name. He spoke as if the money were his. When he realized I was listening, he hung up abruptly. Something's wrong. I feel trapped in a lie I can't fully unravel. Money, Margaret shook her head. Of course it was about money. We need to find out more. Emily closed the diary. My mother had some investments before she disappeared, and there was my father's life insurance, nothing extravagant, but for unscrupulous people, any amount is enough, Margaret finished. I'll call our lawyer right now. While her aunt made the call, Emily thought about their next move. The diary was powerful evidence, but they still needed more to get the court order for the DNA test and stop her mother's transfer. Gregory Nelson, the family's lawyer friend, agreed to meet them immediately at his office in Eugene. He was a 60-year-old man with experience in complex family law cases. After listening carefully to their story and examining the diary, his expression was grave. We have enough to request an injunction preventing the transfer, he explained. We can also petition the court for the DNA test, but we need to act fast. If this Wilson family is as influential as they say, they're probably already mobilizing their own lawyers. How long will it take? Emily asked anxiously. With luck, we can get everything done in 48 hours. I have good contacts at the courthouse. Gregory picked up the phone. I'll get my team started immediately. Meanwhile, you should investigate more about these Wilsons. If they really manipulated Sarah's identity all these years, there must be more inconsistencies to uncover. Emily and Margaret left the lawyer working on the legal documents and returned to Pinewood residence. Emily still needed to fulfill her duties as a social worker to avoid raising suspicions, while Margaret would stay at a nearby hotel. On the way back, Emily received a text from Ashley. Robert Wilson called. He's coming early tomorrow with his wife. Says they're bringing documents for immediate transfer. Time was running out. That night, Emily barely slept. She tossed and turned in the narrow bed of the staff quarters, every minute feeling like an eternity. The thought of losing her mother again, now that she'd found her, was unbearable. She got up before dawn and went to Mrs. Louise's room. She needed to return the diary before its absence was noticed. Using her staff badge, she quietly entered the room. The elderly woman was sound asleep. Carefully, so as not to wake her, Emily placed the diary back in its hiding spot under the mattress. As she did, she noticed a small box also hidden. Curiosity overcame good judgment, and she opened it. Inside, she found a small gold locket. Emily recognized it immediately. It was her mother's, a gift from her father on their wedding anniversary. Inside the locket was a tiny photo, Emily at 12 years old smiling at the camera. On the back, the inscription, "For Sarah with all my love. Emily will always be our greatest treasure." Emily felt hot tears streaming down her face. Her mother had managed to preserve that small memento all these years, hiding it from the Johnsons. On some level, even confused, she knew who she really was. She returned the locket to its place and quietly left the room with renewed determination. No matter the cost, she would bring her mother back home. At 8 a.m., the Johnson couple arrived at Pinewood residence. Emily discreetly watched them from the reception desk. Robert maintained the same authoritative posture as the day before. Beside him, Catherine Johnson seemed like a fragile, nervous woman, constantly looking around as if afraid of being watched. They went straight to Margaret's office. Emily tried to get closer to overhear the conversation, but a security guard blocked her access to the administrative hallway. About half an hour later, Margaret came out of the office and went directly to Emily. "Mrs. Parker, I need you in my office, please." Emily followed the director with a racing heart. Inside the office, Robert Johnson wore a triumphant expression, while Catherine kept her eyes down, avoiding eye contact. "Emily, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson have brought all the documentation for the immediate transfer of Mrs. Louise to a clinic in New York," Margaret explained, visibly uncomfortable, "including medical authorizations and legal documents confirming their custody." "You promised us 48 hours, Emily protested. "It hasn't even been 24. "Unfortunately, I can't ignore valid legal documents." Margaret adjusted her glasses. "Unless you've obtained a court order to the contrary." "We're working on it," Emily replied, staring at Robert. "But I have to ask you, Mr. Johnson, why the rush to transfer your adoptive mother now after years in the same facility? What are you afraid we'll discover?" Robert stood up, irritated. "I won't tolerate any more baseless accusations. I have every right to ensure my mother receives the best care, away from people who disturb her with wild stories." "Stories, like the ones she wrote in her diary," Emily countered. "About how she remembers her real name, Sarah Parker. About how she remembers her daughter, Emily. About how she heard you on the phone talking about money that doesn't belong to you." Robert's face paled. Catherine let out a small whimper. "What diary?" Robert asked, struggling to keep his composure. "My mother doesn't keep diaries. That's part of her mental confusion." "Maybe we should ask her," Emily suggested. "Or better yet, show her the diary and see her reaction." "This is ridiculous." Robert slammed the table. "Director Wilson, I demand you follow our instructions immediately. The ambulance is already on its way to transport my mother. Margaret looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Just then, the office door swung open abruptly. It was Ashley, accompanied by Margaret Parker and a man Emily recognized as her lawyer, Gregory. "Sorry for the interruption," Gregory said, presenting a document, "but I have here a restraining order issued by the judge of the 3rd Civil Court, South Eugene, halting any transfer of resident Louise Johnson until an investigation into her true identity is completed, including a compulsory DNA test." Robert snatched the document from Gregory's hands, reading it frantically. "This is outrageous." "I'll appeal immediately." "Feel free," Gregory smiled calmly, "but until the appeal is ruled on, the order stands. The woman in question will remain at Pinewood residence, and DNA samples will be collected today." Catherine Johnson, who had remained silent until then, suddenly stood up. "Enough, Robert," she said with a trembling voice. "That's enough. I can't live with this any longer." "Quiet, Catherine," Robert ordered with contained fury, but Catherine seemed to have found inexplicable courage. "No, Robert, I've stayed quiet for 20 years. 20 years carrying this guilt." She turned to Emily, tears in her eyes. "We found her that night, in the rain. She was unconscious on the sidewalk near the pharmacy. Robert wanted to call an ambulance, but when we saw her purse, the money, the investment documents—" "Catherine, for God's sake!" Robert tried to interrupt her, but she continued. "We took her home. She woke up confused with no memory. Robert saw an opportunity. He said we could help her, take care of her while she recovered. But days turned into weeks, and Robert started accessing her accounts, making transactions. When she began to recover some memories, especially about her daughter, Robert convinced her it was all imagination, that she was confused." Catherine was openly crying now. "I wanted to stop. So many times I wanted to stop, but we'd already gone too far. And the more time passed, the harder it became to turn back." The entire room was in shock. Diane covered her mouth with her hands. Emily felt a mix of fury and relief at the confession. "You stole 20 years of my mother's life," she finally said, her voice trembling with emotion. 20 years we can never get back." Robert, seeing himself cornered, tried one last desperate move. "It's her word against ours. The diary of a confused woman, my wife's emotional confession. Clearly she's disturbed. This means nothing, legally." "Maybe not," Gregory agreed. "But the DNA test, the bank records we're legally requesting, and now this confession witnessed by several people certainly means something to the county police, who are already on their way." As if to confirm his words, they heard sirens approaching. Robert collapsed into his chair, defeated. Catherine kept crying, repeating, "I'm sorry," like a mantra. Emily could barely process everything happening. After 20 years of uncertainty, of sleepless nights, wondering what had happened to her, the truth was finally coming to light. A painful truth, but one that brought the possibility of a new beginning. "Can I see my mother now?" she asked Diane, who simply nodded, still stunned by the revelation. Emily and Margaret headed to Mrs. Louise's room, accompanied by Ashley. The elderly woman was sitting in the armchair by the window, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding about her true identity. "Good morning, Mom," Emily said softly, sitting beside her. "I brought someone who's missed you very much." Mrs. Louise Sarah looked at Margaret with curiosity. "You seem familiar," she said, tilting her head. "I'm your sister, Sarah," Margaret replied, her voice choked. "Margaret, your younger sister." The elderly woman furrowed her brow, concentrating. "Margaret, we shared a room when we were girls. You were afraid of thunder." Margaret sobbed, nodding. "Yes, Sarah, and you always sang to calm me during storms." Clarity seemed to come and go in the elderly woman's blue eyes. At times, she fully recognized them both. At others, she seemed confused again. But there were more moments of lucidity than Emily had ever seen. "What happened?" Sarah finally asked. "I feel like I've woken from a very long, confusing dream." "It's a long story, Mom," Emily said, holding her hand tenderly. "But what matters is we found you, and now we'll take care of you. Together, as a family." In the days that followed, everything happened with surprising speed. The DNA test confirmed what they already knew. Louise Johnson was, in fact, Sarah Parker. The county police launched an investigation into the Johnson couple, discovering they had taken virtually all of Sarah's assets over the years, including her home in Portland. The medical diagnosis revealed Sarah suffered from a form of traumatic amnesia, worsened by the constant psychological manipulation she had endured. Her mental confusion wasn't dementia, as the Johnsons had claimed, but the result of years being convinced her real memories were delusions. Emily managed to get a leave from her original job in Portland to dedicate herself fully to her mother's recovery. After medical and psychological evaluation, it was decided Sarah would remain at Pinewood residence for the time being, where she was settled and receiving good care, but with Emily moving to a nearby apartment. Sarah's recovery would be a slow process. There were good days when she clearly remembered her past life, and bad days when the confusion returned, but every small step forward was celebrated as a victory. A month after the revelation, Emily, Margaret, and Sarah were in the residence's garden, looking at old family photos. Sarah held a picture from her 40th birthday, with a teenage Emily by her side. "I tried to come home that night," Sarah said suddenly. "After I woke up in the Johnsons' house, even though I was confused, something inside me knew someone was waiting. I tried to run away once, but Robert found me. He told me I was sick, that I was imagining things. Over time, I started to believe him." Emily held her mother's hand gently. "It wasn't your fault, Mom. What matters is we found each other again." 20 years. Sarah shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I lost 20 years of your life, Emily. I didn't see you graduate from college, start your career, get married. Don't get divorced," Emily added with a sad smile. "You didn't miss much there. But I missed your everyday life, your joys, your struggles, that we can't get back." "No," Emily agreed. "But we can make new memories together, starting now." Sarah smiled, a smile that lit up her eyes like in the old days. "You know what helped me most? Not to forget who I was completely?" she asked, pulling a small locket from her pocket. "This. I managed to hide it when Robert took all my things. I looked at your picture every day, even when I couldn't remember who you were. My heart knew, even when my mind forgot." Margaret, who had been watching the scene with emotion, joined them. "We always knew you were alive somewhere, Sarah. Emily never lost hope. And here we are finally together." Sarah held her sister's and daughter's hands. Finally home. Over time, Sarah regained more and more of her memories and clarity. The doctors were surprised by how quickly she improved once free from the Johnsons' manipulative influence. After 6 months of intensive therapy, she was deemed capable of living outside the facility, though she still needed regular check-ins. Emily found a cozy apartment in Eugene where they could both live. The decision not to return to Portland was mutual. There were too many painful memories tied to the old house and her disappearance. A fresh start deserved a new place. The criminal case against Robert and Catherine Johnson continued. Robert awaited trial in custody, while Catherine, who fully cooperated with the investigation, remained free. Much of Sarah's money would never be recovered. It had been spent over the years. But some financial assets remained, and the sale of the Portland house, which had been in the Johnsons' name but was legally returned to Sarah, ensured some financial stability. On an autumn afternoon, while organizing their new apartment, Emily found her mother on the balcony, watching the golden leaves on the trees. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Sarah turned with a serene smile. "How unpredictable life is. 20 years ago, I thought I had lost everything. There were moments when I didn't even know who I was. And now, here I am, rebuilding my life, with my wonderful daughter." Emily hugged her mother tenderly. "You always taught me that no matter how many times we fall, what matters is getting back up." "Seems I taught you well," Sarah teased, though I don't remember saying that. Both laughed, a light, healing laugh that carried the promise of a brighter future. Life wouldn't go back to how it was before. It was impossible to erase 20 years of separation and suffering. But together, they would build a new normal, day by day, memory by memory. A few months later, Emily and Sarah returned to Pinewood, residence for a special visit. It was Sarah's idea to turn her traumatic experience into something positive. Ashley greeted them joyfully. The nurse had become a close friend, instrumental in reuniting the family and Sarah's recovery. "Mrs. Sarah, it's wonderful to see you doing so well," Ashley exclaimed, hugging the former resident. "I can hardly believe the transformation." "You were a big part of that, Ashley," Sarah replied gratefully. "Without your help, I might never have found my family again." Margaret Wilson also came to greet them, visibly humbled after the events that exposed flaws in the institution's protocols. "Mrs. Parker, or rather, Mrs. Sarah, it's a pleasure to see you. I hope you don't hold any grudges about how we handled your situation." "Life's too short for grudges, Director," Sarah answered wisely. "After all, this is where my story started changing for the better." Emily watched with pride at her mother's strength. Despite everything she'd been through, Sarah chose to focus on the future, not the painful past. During the visit, Sarah presented the board with a proposal she and Emily had developed: a stricter verification program for admissions to the care home, with specific protocols for residents with cognitive issues or no apparent family. "No one should go through what I did," Sarah explained. "Vulnerable people deserve extra protection, not less." The proposal was met with enthusiasm. Pinewood residents, eager to restore its reputation after the scandal, not only implemented the suggestions but also invited Sarah to serve as a consultant in developing new safety protocols. On the way home, Emily noticed a special sparkle in her mother's eyes. "You're happy, aren't you?" she asked. "I am, dear," Sarah smiled. "Turning a painful experience into something that can help others brings a kind of healing no medicine can." "You're amazing," Emily squeezed her mother's hand. "After all you've been through, you still think about helping others. That's what gives life meaning, don't you think?" Sarah reflected. "Using our pain to spare others from suffering. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "now I have 20 years of stories to catch up on. I need to set a good example for my future grandchildren." Emily laughed. "Mom, I'm not even dating." "Yet," Sarah winked. "A rediscovered mother has the right to dream, doesn't she?" The two laughed together, walking arm in arm toward the future they could finally build together. Weeks later, Emily and Sarah's apartment hosted a small celebration. It was Sarah's birthday, the first celebrated with family in 20 years. Margaret came from Portland, bringing cousins, nieces, nephews, and old friends Sarah was relearning. Amid laughter and happy tears, Sarah blew out the candles on her cake. "What did you wish for, Mom?" Emily asked, curious. Sarah looked around at the smiling faces of her gathered family. "I already have everything I could ever wish for, my dear," she replied. "After 20 years lost, I finally found my way back home." That night, after all the guests had left, mother and daughter sat together on the porch, gazing at the stars. Without words, simply enjoying each other's presence, the connection that not even 20 years of separation could break. "You know, Emily," Sarah finally said, "even in the most confusing moments, when I couldn't even remember my own name, there was something inside me that knew I was incomplete, as if a part of me was missing." "I felt exactly the same way," Emily confessed, "every single day since you disappeared." "Love remains, even when memory fails," Sarah reflected. "It's stronger than time, stronger than any manipulation." Emily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, just as she had as a child. "I know you still have difficult days, Mom, days when the memories get mixed up." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "But now I have you to remind me who I am, to bring me back when I lose myself." "Always," Emily promised, "just like you always did for me." Under the starry sky, mother and daughter made a silent vow to cherish every moment together, to create memories so strong that no distance or confusion could ever erase them. The journey of healing would continue, with ups and downs, but the most important thing had already been achieved. They were united again, a family rebuilt by love that had survived 2 decades apart. And each day was a new chance to reclaim a little of the lost time, turning the pain of the past into hope for a shared future. The end of the story. Dear listener, now that you've followed this touching journey of Emily and Sarah, share with us how you felt experiencing this story of reunion. Have you ever gone through a family separation that seemed impossible to resolve? Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your story in the comments.